from Professor Sohail Inayatullah, UNESCO Chair in Future Studies.
Thank you very much for this invitation to speak at the opening of the Gurukul Global Conference. Let's begin. My focus is very much on the future. As the world changes, as we participate in changing this world, what's our role, what can be our role, and how do we navigate the currents of change? As we know from the work of Sri P.R. Sarkar, the dream of today will become the reality of tomorrow. The dream of today will become the reality of tomorrow. So the issue is, what are we dreaming? What reality do we prefer? In the late 1960s and early 70s, the work of Oliver Markley suggested that the image leads reality. He noticed the image of a sustainable world, gender cooperation, a more spiritual world, was ahead of the current reality. So they study in history how the pull of the future leads the current reality. Work I've done with Wee Shan Lam, the government of Singapore, talks about the challenge of being ahead. Earlier, he says, working with numerous policy directors, seeing was believing. When they looked at ways to innovate, they would go around the world and find the most innovative cities and learn from them for their green gardens or smart infrastructure. Today, as they are consistently ranked number one, he says we have to move towards believing as seeing. The image of the future, where we wish to go to, becomes decisive. So what are these emerging images? We know today there's a pandemic crisis of global inequity, a climate change crisis. But are there any pivots we're seeing away from this that we can talk about? The world can be different, will be different in the next 10, 20 years. I would like to talk about some of these pivots. The first pivot is the pivot to wiser. At a recent conference on the future of the Islamic International University, the rector talked about moving away from overly westernized, economic-centric, industry-led, reputation-obsessed, dehumanizing universities and knowledge systems towards something else, a wiser system of pedagogy, a wiser system of learning. Working with the government of New Zealand, we've started to imagine, they have started to work on shifting from GDP to well-being, asking themselves, what could New Zealand look like in 2050? This is a project that's not infrastructure-led, but well-being-led. The language they've used is well-being is central in this future. This creates a society in which the mana of yourself is enhanced by lifting the mana of others. The key strategy is community prevention as infrastructure design. This links to what we might call the global health awakening. The rapid movement towards vaccines, the sharing of information, has started to suggest that we can start to imagine a world of planet, prosperity, purpose, and people. The third pivot we're seeing is the anticipatory city. We're seeing experiments in many cities starting to use knowledge and information, real-time sensors, to start to reduce congestion, increase green spaces, reduce pollution, increase well-being, decrease suicides. So these are anticipatory cities, not just focused on roads, rates, and rubbish, but focused on the image of what can be. The fourth pivot is towards distributed energy and information systems, moving towards fossil fuels to home solar, moving from large towers to street furniture as information. This is using the blockchain wisely, distributed information ledgers. Some of the groups I've been working with imagine the genie of energy, real-time information on our energy use per household, per person, and eventually leading to a world of energy for you anytime, anywhere. The fifth pivot is towards deep sustainability. Working with UN, SCAP, throughout the region, they start to talk about we have to move from pollution as individualistic terms to pollution in the commons, my air to our air. We have to ensure eco-health systems are resilient. We know if we don't do that, zoonotic diseases will keep on increasing. We need enforceable regional agreements at regional association levels throughout the world, Africa, Europe, the Americas, the Asia-Pacific region. So the imagination must lead to enforceable legislation to ensure that the commons are kept safe for future generations. In UNESCO, referring to Asia, they called that moving from the king of plastic to the garden of well-being. The next pivot is a pivot towards inclusion. We're working with a large scientific research center, working on COVID-19 solutions, and they said part of their challenge is moving from the traditional way of seeing science, as the director said, challenging white buildings, white coats with white labs. Diversity, they argue, is critical for success. Diversity in thinking, diversity in people. This comes up over and over. Inclusion is foundational for a better society. Working with the government of Egypt, they suggested that if Egypt is to have a manufacturing revolution, it needs to use platform co-ops, AI-led, and bring in those in the informal sector, the people on the street. Give them information about food prices, climate shifts. Find ways of platforms to link suppliers with buyers. Create a far more robust and inclusive system. The government of New Zealand has led in terms of rapid science-based and early decisive policy and strategy on COVID-19. They've done a number of things that have been exceptional. First, the inclusion of Maori. Second, going from the narrative of just me and mine to a team of 5 million. Can we imagine, as Sri Sarkar has suggested, a team of 8 billion? The last pivot is the pivot towards the inner. This is taking seriously inner practice, spiritual practice. We know from the scientific data, hospital resource use drops 42%. 42%. There's considerable gains to be made there. Heart disease drops dramatically as well. Among the elderly, they live longer. So there's considerable health gains and social gains and financial gains towards moving towards the inner. During this COVID-19 crisis, we've called this perspective the needed pause to slow down, reconnect with nature, with friends, with family, and with self. So these are 7 possible pivots moving us out of the current crisis of pandemics in inequity, away from weird towards the wise, towards well-being instead of GDP, towards the anticipatory city instead of the past-based city, towards distributed energy systems and information systems, solar plus AI plus peer-to-peer linking, towards deep sustainability, towards inclusion, and towards the inner. But of course, we should be realistic as well. While the dream creates the future reality, today we know the potential for a zombie apocalypse is global. This is using race and religion to other others, to spread fear instead of compassion and inclusion. We know the possibility of the great despair, 10, 20 years of economic crisis may lie ahead of us. Nations could fracture, wars could break out any moment, anywhere. And thus, we're in contradictions about the future. There's a contradiction between capital and labor, and now the rise of artificial intelligence. The contradiction between fixed identities, that is, we do as the past was based, towards the possibility of a planetary and humanistic identity, beyond ego and family and race and nation. The possibility of transforming patriarchy, dominator systems, towards partnership systems. The contradiction between traditional industrial meat systems, creating pandemics and climate change, to cellular agriculture, food as software, if you will. And of course, the greatest contradiction, tribalized weapons systems with artificial intelligence, meaning the grandest high ground one can have, and the need for a global and regional commons and governance to manage the new technologies. If we can properly manage science and technology, it could lead to an economic and social boom that's unparalleled, as Sri Sarkar has argued. In our book on Asia 2038, we argue for Asia, but also globally, an imagination of solar with AI, using the past to critically transform the future, to start to create regional confederations. When I was in Hong Kong many years ago, we were in a traditional setting, a beautiful temple, and this was tradition. But when we looked closely at the mandalas, at the ceiling, we saw the warning, the possibility of risk ahead. So the future can be used to imagine an awakening, a new world, but also, of course, the warnings ahead of us. We know the largest warning is, can we move towards global governance, global commons, complex adaptive systems, evolution, or will we fragment? How will we use technologies? Will we stay dominator or cooperative? If we do nothing, we will see the revenge of GAIA, pandemics and climate change, a century of pollution ahead of us. This is nested on social Darwinism, where there's a hierarchy of religion, of race, of gender. Or can we move towards Neohumanism, where in fact humans and nature co-evolve, and I would argue with technology as well, transforming today to create a new tomorrow. These are decisions we're making every day in our thoughts, our practices, our legislation, our global strategies. As Yang Chu said, isn't it here that you take a half step wrong and wake up 1,000 miles astray? For Sarkar, this is the great transition, Yuga Sandhi. There's a hegemonic shift to political power, changes in the nature of reality, challenges to truth. How can we navigate? How can we navigate this changing world? In my work, I've developed what's called a Proud Futures Checklist, a way to figure out what are one's anchors. I argues there's 7 anchors. Anchor 1, I ask myself and ask colleagues, does the leader or policy reduce inequity or increase inequity? That's a critical question. Does money keep on rolling or does money get stuck? The second, does the leader or policy speak in terms of the language of race or the language of humanity? Yes, terrible deeds are done, but we should ascribe them to individuals, not the larger challenge of essentialism. How does the leader get elected? Is it politics of fear or the ethics of inclusion? We know in the world of con-spirituality, certain religious groups are blamed. Certain leaders are blamed. And we know this is based on a lack of understanding of science and a lack of individual power. We know in one country, the US, for example, 1 in 4 believe that the sun goes around the earth, says the National Science Foundation. The third anchor is gender. Does a leader or policy support gender equity or coordinated cooperation? As Sri Sarkar has argued, a bird needs 2 wings to fly. We know just in the Asia-Pacific region, $850 billion of increased value will occur as the region becomes far more gendered equitable. 5, are the policies focused on just the economy or are well-being and spirituality included? Does the inner have a role in transformation? Does the inner have a role in social life? 6th, and this is crucial, does the leader or policy support innovation? Science and new technologies. We do not wish to go back to the past. In the context of equity and ethics, we can use technology to reduce working hours and increase personal and collective well-being. So this is a world where certainly I would not go as far as symbiosis, but we can imagine conscious coevolution of humans with nature, with technology for the greater good. And this is critical here. Does nature flourish in their policies and strategies? Or is nature without rights? is, does nature have no purpose? In conclusion, when we think about the longer term, what will occur? I was fortunate to spend time with physicist Maslin Atman. Earlier, she worked in the UN, the Center for First Contact. And when I asked her the long-term future, she said, remember, evolution favors the efficient. And thus it struck me, the nation state will disappear because it is inefficient in allocating identity. Neohumanism is far more efficient. Capitalism will die a mature death because it's inefficient in allocating resources. There's no maxi, there's no mini. We don't move forward ahead. Patriarchy is inefficient in allocating identity, wealth, and purpose, as there's exclusion of productivity. Religionism is inefficient in allocating community, as there's always someone who will be pushed away, who will be shunned, or worse, eliminated. Materialism is inefficient in allocating purpose and joy. And thus, spirituality is the way forward, purpose with bliss. If you look at the works of Sri Sarkar, his words, I believe it is for these reasons why he said, this is why I say the future of the human race is not dark, rather it is strikingly resplendent. He's offering an image, being on the leading edge of the future. The task of Gurukul over the short, medium, and long term is to start to create that reality. Thank you so much for your time.